Greetings, everyone. Good morning. It's always an honor to come and speak to a UU gathering. I would say that out of my 28 years of working in the environmental justice movement and also on climate change issues, out of all of the different faiths and denominations, I probably have spoken to more UU congregations. You can applaud that, absolutely, because you guys are so awesomely progressive and don't just talk the talk but walk the walk as well. And so I'm really honored to be here today. What I want to talk about in terms of the Green New Deal are two major themes. One is the urgency of now, and the second is how do we ensure that the Green New Deal is not the same old deal for environmental justice communities? And that's very important. We know the urgency of now has been captured by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the National Climate Assessment, that basically says that we have to take action to reduce carbon emissions by 45%. Last year they said within the next 12 years. But looking at the rapid melting that's taking place in the Arctic, the fires and the Amazon rainforest, we see that a lot of things that are happening that actually may be closing that window that we have to take really productive action. And so the Green New Deal is one of the ways that we're looking at that, but my experience working with people on the ground in South Carolina and other places where we have been impacted by the climate crisis over and over again. So in South Carolina, where I live, 2015, we had what then Governor Nikki Haley called the 1,000-year flood. Then in 2016, we had Hurricane Matthew. Then in 2017, we had more flooding. Then in 2018, we had Hurricane Florence. And then this year, we had Hurricane Dorian. So we have communities that have been hit over and over and over again. So that some of the things the reports are saying will happen in the future is already happening. So in Duloc, Louisiana, we see elevated homes and people who are losing a football-sized piece of land daily due to sea level rise. You know, in Sellis, South Carolina, in Marion County, we have people who have given up repairing their homes and have just moved away with no intention of ever returning again. In that same county, we have almost 300 homes where people have been told that they must elevate their homes or else they won't be eligible for flood insurance when the next storm comes. And we're talking about a county that is 65% African American and who has twice the national poverty rate. And so we did some work along with the Sierra Club and contacted some engineering firms and said, what does it cost to elevate a small 900 square foot home? And they said, well, you're talking about starting at $20,000. And this is for people who worked in our homes, people who worked in our fields, many senior citizens who get SSI checks because the people they worked for never paid into Social Security for them. And I have never seen an SSI check larger than $800 a month. So how can people like that elevate their homes? And so right now we're praying that they don't get hit by another hurricane or flood because many of these folks haven't returned home. We know there's an urgency of now because in Sellis, South Carolina, where Mayor Barbara Hopkins says she has a 94-year-old woman who's been calling her since 2016 wanting to know, when can I get back in my home? And while she lives from one child's house to another child's house to another child's house. So there's an urgency of now. And how do we address that with the Green New Deal? So we're in conversation with some of the architects, the policy writers of the Green New Deal, like New Consensus. We've also been on various calls with U.S. Climate Action Network, board on which I serve, with Green Faith and others. And what we have found are some significant gaps in what has been proposed, and also some significant gaps that we need to share with our policymakers when it comes to ensuring that we have a just transition and that we have a just new energy economy that's created. And so let me share some of the things that are unique to small towns and rural communities. In many of the places in South Carolina and Albany, Georgia that have been hit, people tell us that the flooding is worse because their counties have not had the money to clean out the ditches for 25 years. So that means when the floods come, the waters don't flow along the ditches, they just back up into people's homes. That's a pretty simple solution. Those are shovel-ready jobs where you don't have to really train people, but that can create jobs on a massive level around the country. We found that in another community, Britain's Neck, that they have the Little PD River that feeds into the Big PD River, but over the years, sediment has built up, but they're not able to get the Little PD River dredged out because it has a conservation status as a scenic river, so nothing can be done. And so when you go down to that community, people will actually point at a spot and say, you see that spot over there? We used to swim there when we were children, and we couldn't go out too far because it was deep, too deep, but now you can literally wade across the river in that spot. And so there's a lot of solutions, and what we're really concerned about when we say, will the Green New Deal be the same old deal for environmental justice communities, is ensuring that there are community-led climate solutions that are implemented by people in those communities who understand what the problems and the needs are. Because let's be frank, just as we are going to the Hill to talk about the Green New Deal and advocate for justice and equity, at the very same time there are corporate lobbyists who are trying to get enacted legislation that really will not solve the problem, that are really false solutions. And I'll lift one up, like the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Bill, which basically says, well, instead of the polluters paying for the devastation that they have brought upon this country, let's just raise the price of fossil fuels, gasoline for everyone, and then that will discourage people supposedly to use less fossil fuels, and then everyone in America will get this carbon dividend check of maybe up to $4,000, and what will people do with that? Motor to Walmart, buy another gasoline car, you know, and so we have to be careful of these false solutions that are out there. One of the things that we are proposing is that as we look at job creation, as we look at community-led climate solutions, that we look at things like community action agencies would exist all over this country, and they're run by people in the community who know the communities, the problems and the solutions that both best fit. And so we are worried, we're very concerned about the fact that even as we go to Capitol Hill, there are lobbyists who are pushing for corporations, utilities, and others to get whatever funding will be attached to legislation. I just put it this way, we're gonna have some corporate entities and others that once the Green New Deal or other bills are passed, they are going to belly up to Congress like hogs to a trough. And so we have to ensure that we don't leave communities out and behind. Another thing that we're concerned about is training. So we can't have a just transition that creates new jobs if people are not skilled, if they're not trained to become solar installers, etc. So we have done 5 trainings for solar installers. The first one being the trainer with people, and that was in 2017 with environmental justice organizations from Georgia, Mississippi, Virginia, and South Carolina. And all of them have gone back and trained at least 10 people in their communities. And let me tell you why that's important. When President Barack Obama had his stimulus package and $58 million came to the state of South Carolina for weatherization and energy efficiency, the decision that was made was that the best impact that could be made upon climate change would be to go after those places that had the largest carbon footprint. And that's great, but it meant what? Universities, municipal buildings, factories, and by the time they got around to communities, the money was gone. And so one of the things that we're proposing is making sure that we have training going on at the community level for things like NAPCEP certification for solar installers, that certification is accepted all across the country and all around the world to ensure that once legislation is passed, that the eligibility requirements are not elevated. So I'm gonna not call the name of a technical college, but there's a technical college that we know of that is the only technical college in this particular state that trains people for solar installation jobs. But in order for people in, say, my area to go there, you're talking about a 3-hour drive one way. Classes are only held on Fridays and Saturdays. You have to pay for them. And then you also have to have enough money to stay in a hotel and buy meals. So what does that do for people from low wealth communities and a lot of folks from people of color community? It leaves them out of the process. So what we like to talk about is community in place training. And we already see that with a lot of colleges and universities where education is taking place, not so much on the campus, but it's taking place either over the internet or in libraries and other places. And so that's part of our concern. And why is it so important that we do this right? We know that we have to do it right because of the climate crisis. We know that the impacts are going to get worse. We know that this is really only the beginning of massive devastation. We know also that what we come up with, the answers that we provide, the work that we do, the policies that we put in place, that generations to come are going to look back at us and see what we did and what we failed to do. And as people of faith, we're guided by principles of justice, but we're also guided by the fact that we are stewards of the earth and we are called to care for the least among us. And so I don't want to have us walk away from here thinking it's all doom and gloom. No, we can make changes, and we can do it in a really, really quick and authentic way that is just for everyone. And I'll give you an example. I grew up in New York City, but my family's from South Carolina. So in the 60s, as a child, when I would go down to visit where my family lives, and if you ever go with me, don't get frightened, okay? Because first of all, you better have gas in your car, okay? Because we're gonna drive for about 25 miles, and you will not see a store, nor will you see a gas station. And a lot of times when I take people down to visit my community, people look and they say, Pastor, you sure we're going to your community? As if maybe I might be driving them down a dirt road or something, you know. But when you get down there, you find 2,000 1,000 people. It's not a town, it's not a city, it's just a rural community. So as a child, when I went down there, all the roads were dirt, with the exception of Highway 908 and Highway 41 and Highway 378 that goes towards Myrtle Beach. So we took off our shoes and our socks because all you were gonna do is get your shoes and socks dirty walking around on dirt yards and dirt roads. And when I went down to visit in elementary school, no one had indoor plumbing. No one had indoor toilets. It was all outhouses. For my grandfather, who was a sharecropper, he didn't even have electricity. At night, he lit the kerosene lamps, and the only entertainment was a battery-operated radio. But let's fast forward from the 1960s to the 1980s. Now everyone has telephones. Everyone has electricity. All the roads are paved. Just a huge change in a short amount of time. But it's not going to happen if we depend on what I call the usual suspects. The people who are making a profit off of fossil fuels and who are taking their time transitioning to the new economy because they want to ensure that their shareholders don't lose out on their dividends, while in the meantime we may be losing the entire planet and civilization as we know it. So we want to encourage you that as you go to visit your elected officials, your Congress people, to let them know that there's an urgency of now. But also to let them know that if our transition is not just, is not equitable, then we are likely to find ourselves still in dire straits and creating the same kinds of problems that we have today. Because let me tell you how this all started. Because we didn't care about the least among us. Because we didn't care about the other. So it was all right if you built a polluting facility over there. But then if that polluter came to another community, and let me just be frank, a predominantly white, middle class or well-to-do community, you would see crowds of people break out with t-shirts that said NIMBY across it. You know what that means, right? Not in my backyard. And so we thought that it was all right to build polluting facilities in low wealth and people of color communities. And we forgot that the wind blows and waters flow. And that pollution wasn't going to stay stationary over certain communities, but instead it spread. And it spread to the point that now it has impacted the entire planet and every life, be it human, flora, fauna on the planet. So if we are not careful in having a just transition, if we still believe that we can leave people behind and leave people out, I can guarantee you that injustice only breeds one thing, and that's more injustice. And when we think not of our brothers and sisters, but instead we see each other as the other, that is the formula to how we oppress people, neglect people, and forget people. Whether you are a woman, whether it's because of your sexual orientation, your race, where you were born, whether or not you have U.S. citizenship, once you can mold people and present people as the other, then people feel that they can do anything to them or do nothing for them at all. And so the urgency of now is upon us. And we have to make sure that what's put in place, the Green New Deal, will be such that we have justice and we have equity. And equity is very important because what we're finding is that there is no one size that fits all. So when we visited farmers outside of Albany, Georgia, part of their concern from Hurricane Michael and others was how do we ensure that we don't lose our greenhouses? How do we ensure that we don't have to plant our crops so late that we don't get the yields that we need? How do we ensure that we're not losing our trees and our forests aren't standing and our natural God-given protection against flooding and the trees that filter our water and draw the carbon from the air and put oxygen in the air so that we can breathe? How can we ensure, the farmers asked us, that when we have a drought and we can no longer afford to put out any more money than what we presently are doing because we're struggling to survive, how can we put in irrigation systems that are solar powered? And that's one of the things, one of the trainings that'll be coming up next month. But we have to have community-led solutions. We have to ensure that there's justice and equity for all. And that is the only way that we can win. We can't win being siloed. We can't win being separated. This is an all hands on deck moment. And I'll just end by quoting the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. We might have come over here on separate ships, but we're all in the same boat now.